Kia ora and welcome to another video in the series aimed at teaching you how to play Riftbound step by step, hopefully getting you ready for your first Nexus 9. In today's video, we're going to be taking a step back and looking at the Banish Mel that we made together. I believe it was in video 12, 13, and kind of just after I've played a few games with it, I've talked to a few people in the Riftbound community about it, I thought that we could go through it together and talk about what went well and what didn't go so well. So without further ado, the things that went well. It was a really fun experience where game one I played against a Vi. This Vi, much like every other Vi, it's very underhanded right now in the way that it struggles to have its own identity, but the opponent I was versing did a really good job of making it a tough battle for both of us to really get where we wanted to be. And then game two, I versed a Kennen. Now, Kennen at the moment is very difficult, especially for decks such as my own, which really rely on the opponent holding battlefields or staying at battlefields. The Kennen made it very difficult for me to do so. And the last one I versed was a Draven, which once again really pushed me to my limits. And it was a really fascinating game. I ended up winning against the Vi and the Draven and losing against the Kennen, but every game went to a game 3, and every single match was incredible and taught me something new about this deck. Now, a few things I want to quickly just push to one side is in the deck I ended up taking with me, I did not have in my sideboard Ravenbloom Prefix. This was swapped out for instead Acceptable Losses, which is a chaos spell that allows each person to choose which gear they kill. I did not verse many decks which I really would have preferred to have known what I was getting rid of. With Ravenbloom Prefix, that is an option. Against the Vi, I got a wonderful opening hand of 2 Acceptable Losses, and was able to get rid of not only their Hextech Gauntlets, but also their Pendulum Blade, and really put them on the back foot for a lot of the tempo that they would have gotten, and that's really what won me the game 3. The other adjustments were I did not bring in Decree of Insight, I instead had a Mel Newly Awakened in this slot, but between this and Mel, I never used either. I did not verse a single body deck, and the Mel Newly Awakened really just kind of sat as a nothing burger, unfortunately. In the starting deck, everything else was completely accurate, except I got rid of a Twilight Step, and I got rid of a Pack of Wonders, and I swapped those out for I forget at this stage what it was. Oh, I brought in an additional copy of Gust, and I brought in, I believe it was a third copy of Starcrossed, but I could be wrong. I will have to double check what I ended up adjusting it to. But those were the only real adjustments I made. Now, how did it go? First and foremost, Gust was very funny, but also provided very little in the utility that I really wanted it to. Most of the time, this worked in my favor, but there were some times that I was looking and going, oh, that's really cool. I would be banishing, or I'd be putting back to hand maybe a card they really want to be back in hand. Or the only available units that would be beneficial from this are units that they do not want me to kill. So this sometimes is really strong. I will continue to most likely keep 1 if not 2 copies. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. Stacked deck. Now this one actually is truly fascinating. Stacked deck. I did not see a single copy of in my first 2 matches against the Vi opponent. In the Kennen, I saw all of them in 2 games, and in the third game I did not. And against the Draven, I saw them kind of regularly, but not overly presented. And the thing that I found really fascinating across the board was when I saw a stacked deck, off of a stacked deck, I pushed myself more to actually take it because I thought that there was going to be something better deeper. In reality, useless. I the first thing I will be doing is I'll be moving all these onto the bench. I do not believe that they are necessary at this stage. Stupefy, really funny. It is a draw 1 for 1 energy and puts some units in range for Mel Defiant Soul. Otherwise, sometimes it was the chosen card to discard through Mel Defiant Soul, because while the -1 and the draw 1 is really handy, the alternatives weren't that great. Onto Mesmerize, this was something I never discarded. In fact, this was a card that I truly enjoyed utilizing, not only the returning, but the -2. I had some incredibly powerful turns, which forced the opponent to really adjust how they were playing the game in a truly fascinating way. Against the Draven in particular, they moved in with a Kaiser, I believe, against my Ravenbloom student at the, it was the Threshold of the Grey, I believe. I was running that battlefield, and I'll talk about the battlefields in a second, but this would put him up to a 3, and the Kaiser immediately went down to a 2, and then they, I believe it wasn't this one where they chose to Spinning Axe, but they actually had to flash their Kaiser away, which allowed me to maintain control of that battlefield for essentially 1 rune recycled. So the Mesmerize might go to a 3 stack, but we'll see. Now, Rebuttal, kind of, if you couldn't tell by the 3 decks that I had to, the legends I had to oppose, Rebuttal wasn't the most beneficial card in any of these. Against the Vi, I believe they played a total of maybe 3 spells in the entire game. Against the Draven, it was Ride the Wind and Stacked Deck. And between those two, Ride the Wind was definitely the one I was wanting to hunt for a rebuttal, but the timing was never there, and unfortunately it just kind of ended up being really expensive for not much return. Now against the Kennen, I actually had this conversation with the Kennen in which I said that they should have really considered adjusting either Mel's legend ability to be action speed, or adjusting Rebuttal to have Banish as part of the chain, because that way it would prevent the ability for Stacked Deck. If you chose to Rebuttal Stacked Deck because you really want to stop the Kennen's tempo, that was a way to do it. It would be to not only take control or counter it, but just at the end of the day banish it. So for me, while Rebuttal is very good and will be very good into certain colours, the 3 legends I versed did not give this great potential, and so while I will be keeping it, I will not be expanding it up to a 2 just yet, as many people did suggest going up to 2 for more consistency. Downstage Dramatics is what we talked about originally with Dredge. It was wrong. We needed to have this instead be Dredge, because there were some times that I was choosing this to get discard with Mel, which made this a dead card in my trash. In reality, I need to be looking to add a few more flow spells, such as Twilight Steps, that allow me to discard with Mel and then play from trash, which Dredge would be. So these 2 are going to the bench as well. Flash. Flash is an interesting one. It was kind of nice seeing it when I did see it, but I was not sitting there on the edge of my seat really praying for Flash to show up. And as such, while it is a very strong staple in a lot of purple decks, it was not the thing I was truly begging for in any hand, except perhaps when I had a really strong point lead, which in some cases I did, where it'd be, 4 points to 2 points, and they would attempt to really push me off with a high amount of might, in which I could pull back. They'd go to 6, and then the next they'd go to 4, and then the next turn I could push to 6. Or what actually more likely happened was I would be on match point, and I would threaten a hold with 2 individual units, really forcing them to have to answer me in some way, and not just hold. And then between a mixture of Flash, Ride the Wind, Smokescreen, and Starcrossed, they were really at a disadvantage at walking into me. But for the same reasons, I do think that Flash has some capacity to be moved away. Now, I'm just very quickly going to, because I realize that I'm about to start blocking the cards we're going to talk about, we will now look at the next one, which is Pack of Wonders. Pack of Wonders, unfortunately, did get cut initially. It was one of the few cards that I chose to remove prior to, in place of alternative cards, and genuinely, I think it's going to come back. Stacked deck is going to be, a Pack of Wonders probably going to be a 2 copy of. And I'm actually going to preemptively Pack of Wonders on the bench, because I do think it has a lot of potential to be a really strong card, and we'll get into why very shortly. But next is Plundering Porro. Plundering Porro was a truly fantastic turn 1 drop, especially with the amount of power consumption that this deck consumes. If we look here, the power curve is we have 20 that do nothing, but 17 cards that cost 1. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, we've got to also remember certain cards have additional consumptions alongside it, or those cards are very small and we have them as quick reactives, and they will burn a lot very quickly. A great example of that is when it comes to cards such as Ride the Wind and Smokescreen, sorry, not Smokescreen, Ride the Wind, or Mesmerize, or Starcrossed. While I may play them initially, we've also got to remember that Fizz replays those cards, and so that 17 is actually instead an additional 19, 20, 21, maybe even a 22, 23 situation. So if 23 of our cards are burning power and we have no way to generate that power, that is always something to be very mindful of. So moving forward, Pack of Wonders will be very strong. Sorry, not Plundering Porro will be very strong as a very early drop, but maybe even bringing in alternatives that generate gold, or even seals of Discord, may be necessary to offset that cost. On to the next is Ravenbloom Student, where if we actually go back to that statistics, we can see that 15 cards of our deck are spells, which means that the Ravenbloom is getting consistently strong bonuses, especially paired with the fact that a large number of those spells, in particular the 2 Stupefies, the 2 Mesmerize, the Smokescreen, all actually reduce the opponent's might as well, meaning that this gets an even further increase through those means. Many times I was able to play multiple spells while my Ravenbloom was at base, and force the opponent into a quick realization that they're not going to be able to really maintain what their assumption was, because obviously you do might counts initially, but a might count changes very quickly when a Ravenbloom, or even 2, exist in the game. For that reason, I think I might move them up to a 3 stack and actually reduce a Tide Turner. And quickly on Tide Turner did exactly what it needed to do a lot of the time, but there were some times where Tide Turner I would have much preferred being a Ravenbloom or a Plundering Porro, and as such I will most likely be moving one of these to the bench as well, and we'll look at Plundering Porro and Ravenbloom as alternatives to bring in and fill that position for it. On to the next card, which as I briefly mentioned was Ride the Wind. This was a really fascinating card because there were some situations in which the opponent had Vilemore's Lair. They had which really hurt the rest of my deck, especially because Tide Turner can't do anything about that, but Ride the Wind gave an alternative. But also the capacity to score on the opponent's turn, or force really awkward positions, such as being able to Covert Informant, move in, Ride the Wind, move, another move, and this is drawn 3 for the cost of a 1 Ride the Wind. That happened only a handful of times, but the fact that it happened regardless is a great recognition of the multiple forms of synergy that this card can have between the defensive, offensive, and utility aspects of it. Smokescreen, bit of a dead card, unfortunately. I see what it's going for. I really appreciated what it was going to do for me. But 9 times out of 10, it really wasn't providing the bonuses that I needed it to do, or I wasn't seeing it to get those bonuses. And I understand as a 1 that it is meant to be, that you occasionally see it, and it's fantastic to see it, but it isn't guaranteed. But it's particular with when it comes to Smokescreen, I did just feel like it let me down a bit. And as such, this will go to the bench temporarily. Now, Twilight Step. This is a truly fascinating situation where it is a flow card, so I don't mind burning it with Mel. Oh, sorry, discarding it with Mel. But at the same time, I often found myself, when it was in hand, looking at the opponent more than I was looking at my own units for the potential to move, and it being at slow speed really hampered my ability to play as a bit more aggressive, because if I, let's say, did not have a readied unit, which did happen occasionally, I can't play Mel, then move the unit into a battlefield where I don't have units, because the opponent immediately scores a point because Twilight Step and Mel are both at slow speed. As such, I do see the bonus of Twilight Step, especially because it's a flow card, but at the moment I do have to bench it because it just didn't provide me the bonuses that I was really looking for. The next one is Bewitching Spirit, which it's a bit of an interesting situation, because with Bewitching Spirit, when I played it, it felt good. It felt really strong. It was a unit that did stick around a little bit, and because of the capacity this deck has to bring units back, my opponent had to be very mindful of that, and in some ways Bewitching Spirit was able to soak up a lot of aggression. Great examples are Falling Stars, targeting the Bewitching Spirit, and a Ravenbloom, leaving my Mel and my Covert Informants alone, because they realized that while these are very powerful, the Mel and the Covert, the Ravenbloom and the Bewitching Spirit provide so much more aggression in this deck. And funnily enough, against the Vi, I was able to get them to 0 cards. And that is also when I started seeing my second Bewitching, which at that stage, if they're running on 0 cards, was actually useless. And so while I really like this, I'm gonna bench it, because it doesn't fit the archetype we're going for here of Banish, and in some ways Bewitching Spirit benefits Kennen. And while that sounds so childish, of like, oh, I'm going to get rid of it because it offers this one deck benefits, the reality of the situation is Bewitching Spirit, with the existence of flow, has been nerfed, not significantly, but marginally, in a way that is worth considering for future builds. The next was Lecturing Yordle. Now, Lecturing Yordle was a very interesting card that I ended up sideboarding 9 times out of 10. It is expensive for draw, especially when we consider that while Covert Informant does cost a power, it is a move draw, and the tank of Lecturing Yordle doesn't matter as much. So instead, if I actually filter for draw cards, it would make more sense to have an alternative card in its position, such as Mel Newly Awakened in the main board, which draws on play and gives me another way to empower my legend. And while it isn't a turn 1 going second play, it is nonetheless a very strong play. Alternatives would be Israel, but I don't have a lot of optional costs because Empower isn't an optional cost. The Thousand Tail Watcher is the only one that actually provides that utility, even in the sideboard, except for Existential Dread. So it's really worth considering. The next one is would be a good alternative to Lecturing Yordle, would actually be something such as Diana Lunari, which, fascinating enough, is because a showdown doesn't have to be combat showdown, and being able to multiple times predict rather than draw is quite strong. so this would also be a strong alternative. Same thing with Lunar Bloom, and I do have this in the gin now, but Clairvoyance, I wouldn't run Questionable Tome because that's gear, and if we're running acceptable losses, we don't really want to have gear that might die. So that explains why this is, we only have the one, which if I remember correctly is, I don't remember correctly which one, oh, Bag Wonder, sorry, which we are putting up to 2, so for some reasons maybe Questionable Tome, other reasons not really. I'd actually probably look at Diamond Luminari, so I'll put 3 to the bench, and I'll move these 2 to the bench. The next card is also quite fun, which was Tornado Warrior. I got 1 proc of his Empower Disempower, and it was purely utilized in order to disempower the Mel. While it is a very strong 3-drop unit that doesn't provide any bonuses if you just play it from raw, or from hand I should say, it was nonetheless very interesting, but I think it doesn't provide what it needed to. Whether it be because I was never in a really strong position, I was more focused on move in with 1 unit in a way that forced the opponent awkwardly to have to match me, or I was moving in with a handful of units with an already empowered Mel, so the timing was never really there for the Tornado Warrior because it requires the unit to be there with him, and so the only real time that would play heavily in my favour would be if I had my Mel at a battlefield, either empowered or unempowered, doesn't matter, and then the Tornado Warrior could flip on the opponent's turn and resolve this on the opponent's turn, or become ready on my turn. But the number of times I was holding off on moving Mel anywhere, instead just using her as a strong reminder to the opponent that it exists as a Formite, was really was a lot more impactful. Now, Covert Informant, I very briefly touched on it. Great card. I'm most likely going to move this up to a 3 of, because while it isn't the worst thing, like it does kind of hurt having multiple power consuming cards in my hand, the biggest issue is not being able to draw. And while Pack of Wonders will benefit me greatly in some ways because of it, the Covert Informant, I think, actually should be maybe bumped up to a 1 of, not a 3 of, sorry. And so we'll move 1 to the bench temporarily, and we'll move on to the next one, because I think that this, as I explained with Ride the Wind, the draw benefited. Even if it drew only once, maybe twice, it really was really strong for me in maintaining pressure against the opponent and having at least a handful of cards. When I didn't see this against the Vi over all 3 matches, there were 2 games where we were both just drawing from the top and immediately playing that card, and it became a game of who has the better top decks than the opponent. Moving on to Fizz. Fizz was a truly interesting one. I think... oh, actually, there we go. Fizz was a truly interesting one in which the number of times I had a Fizz in hand, and rather than play him because I wanted a unit, I withheld playing him and focused more on just not playing a unit and having a whole bunch of runes up. Even if I had, sometimes I would have 7 energy worth of cards in my hand, and I would have 10 runes, I would just refuse to play the Fizz because it made no point. I really strongly utilized the combination of Fizz into Starcrossed, Fizz into Mesmerize, or even a Fizz into a Switcheroo at one stage. I didn't do it in the end, but it was a strong consideration of playing the Fizz, swapping 2 units. It was a Rhasa and one of the new purple 2-mite units, swapping those 2, killing the Rhasa, and then leaving the other unit there to be it by itself. I didn't end up doing that, and I'll talk a bit more about the specifics of the games maybe in a bit, but long story short, it's because I ended up having a top deck of a Thousand Tail Watcher, and I was already on 6 points, they were on 3 points. I let them hold to 5 while I built up my board, and then the following turn I actually just drew into an unchecked power and ruined their day anyway. My apologies to my opponent on that one, but so Fizz in some ways was truly fascinating, in which I didn't mind if I had to get rid of him, for instances such as if the opponent had a Bewitching Spirit, not that they did, but at the same time, playing him without having some form of functionality with the trash limited me in some ways, but also made it a lot easier for me to decide who to get rid of as a spell for Mel Defiant Soul if I had a fizz in hand, because I knew if I was to, for instance, discard a stacked deck, I could use the fizz to get it back. But I also think for that exact same reason, that is why I'm getting rid of the stacked deck, because bringing a fizz back to play arguably a terrible card for Mel, which provides no utility, but instead just provides me continued draw. Weak. It looks weak to the opponent, but B, it just recycles more powerful cards, especially in a deck such as that where over the whole board you had 3 playsets and everything else was 2s and 1s, the 2 playsets being Titro and a stacked deck. Having so many individuals or double cards and having to choose which one to keep was really dangerous, and so stacked deck needs to go, and Fizz will maintain his position as a 2, because seeing him is very nice, but having multiple in hand was always very uncomfortable. Moving on to Starcrossed, beautiful card. Probably immediately should go up to a 3 of. I'm sure those who watched the initial build were probably saying, why aren't you making Starcrossed a 3 of? And the reality is because I didn't really think about it. I was more focused on utilizing the Banish ability of Mel than I was the return, but after playing some games and being able to Starcrossed more effectively, awkward situations for my opponent was very beneficial, and actually did win me a very good number of battles, because the opponent had to play around the existence of a Starcrossed for 3 and 1, when the reality is I might be holding on to a Mesmerize and a Ride the Wind combination, so 3 up with with three runes up on the opponent's turn. As a purple deck, you've always got to consider Starcross, and so they had to play around it so much that they had to sometimes bite the bullet and accept the fact that they were going to maybe lose that unit. So Starcrossed works really well as not only kind of like if you play League of Legends, it's kind of like a Blitzcrank hook. Not using it while still having it there is so much more mentally draining for the opponent, and forces them into such an awkward position, rather than just bam, play it immediately and let them decide the rest of the game with that knowledge that you don't have that anymore, or the turn I should say. This one is it's a truly fascinating card. It is. I played it, I never empowered it, and that sounds weird. Why wouldn't you? And the reality is because this deck does not have the longevity in the utilization of its runes that some others do. Like I talked about, there are a multitude of cards that burn runes, and with these adjustments that will change, but first and foremost, it became a position of I would play it, and if I empowered it, I may not even trigger it, because it would die immediately. And so I didn't get enough experience with this, but I also believe in it enough to consider bringing another one into the main board. Onto the Chosen Champion, Mel Defiant Soul. Fantastic. Much better than Mel Newly Awakened for this type of deck. Mel Newly Awakened to me is a sideboard, not a main. It is not a Chosen Champion. If it is in the main, it is a draw. But at the same time, we need more of them. I discussed how having a few of them felt really clunky, how having a few of them did not sit comfortably with the rune economy of the game, but not being able to bring them back from the trash, having it die early, or having to sacrifice it to maintain tempo never felt good, and so I think while it won't go to a 3, it definitely will go to a 2. The last card in the main deck is Thousand Tail Watcher. Now, Thousand Tail Watcher is also another fascinating option. I had a few games where it was beautifully timed. I had some games, obviously, where you sit in the main hand and you have to tie, like you have to think, am I going to see the other one? Or am I better off holding onto this in the hopes of seeing the other one, because I won't see the other one. It is perfect as a 2 in the main, and it sounds truly weird by saying that, but the capacity for you to reduce the entire opponent's battlefield by 3 would tie it obviously a bit more well into the blue Mel, but pairing this with things such as Gust, pairing it with the flurry, actually, just the fact that it exists, put the opponent in such a back step that they had to respect it. If I played it game 1, they had to respect it for game 2. And being able to not play this accelerated and then move in my small units, such as if I still have my Poros or my Raven Blooms, or moving my Fizzes, and being able to kill units that they usually wouldn't be able to kill, especially pairing it with Mel's Legend ability by reducing units by an additional 2, I was able to see my my regular normal units get rid of Dariuses, get rid of Showboat Dravens, get rid of Rhasas, and that is essentially what this card is there for. It is there to regain control and play a bit slower. The idea behind this deck, the more I play it, is have an aggressive early and then bring it back, slow down, make the opponent, force the opponent, don't even just make it, force the opponent into short breaths on the battlefields, never let them hold, and then when they see this, they will never hold again. So I think a 2 is good. I won't go up to 3, especially 1 on the side. Onto the sideboard, as we say, Decree of Insight. Didn't see it because I didn't play it, and in the Nexus night I went to, there weren't many orange legends, and if we kind of think about it, if I filter to type legend and then focus only on body, excuse me, you're going to get upset with me because you're not going to let me. Okay, clear, filter, type legend. Okay, it's not going to show it to me. That's fine. What I was going to say is, if you really look at the types of legends you have that fit the body category, off the top of my head, Garen, Fiora, Set, Misfortune, of Master Yi, of those they play Aurora, and those that don't do play large units, but of those I didn't see any, and so obviously this isn't getting play, but I do think it still has a place here. So it's not going anywhere immediately. On to the next one, Existential Dread. I brought this in as a off the sideboard a handful of times, and when I did see it, it was very fun. It was, no one truly expects it, and if you think about the cost of Existential Dread, it is a 1 energy, 1 chaos, but then a repeat of 2 energy, so it costs the same as a Starcrossed. And there was a situation in which my opponent heavily was like, oh, he's going to have Starcrossed, he's going to have Starcrossed, and he's only got maybe 1 or 2 units, and both those units are at battlefields, and this did happen. I had a Tide Turner 1 battlefield, and 1 unit, a Raven Bloom at the other, and they moved in, I believe it was just a regular, nothing, no rhyme or reason, just I can't remember the unit exactly, but they move it in, and they expect a Starcrossed, and they know that either way they're getting a Conquer. Being able to Existential Dread and force the opponent to not only return that unit back to hand, but slow down the game because they have to fight in combat. And this also gave Raven Bloom +1. It's an awkward position for the opponent to be in, and that's why Existential Dread exists. But these kind of utility cards benefited me greatly, and it will benefit anyone who builds purple, obviously, but any legend, I should say. But that one will stay. Abandon. Abandon is a great way to counter certain deck archetypes, but across the board, of the opponents that I played, this was not it. I never brought this in. I many times considered the fact that rather than having Abandon, I would have much preferred having a flurry of alternatives. But after discussing, Abandon is a great one-off, and having Hard Bargain as the other is a great alternative, because Hard Bargain essentially ruins the capacity for the opponent to play reactively. If they're playing low, if they're playing, especially as the current meta is looking, with average cost units, a lot of burn of runes, the adjustment to a Hard Bargain, which makes the opponent pay 2, but I can repeat it for 2, it's fascinating, and it has a place. So that may go into the sideboard. Switcheroo, I briefly mentioned it, I did to the opponent to their own 2 units, but Switcheroo was also a very fascinating card because there were times where the opponent, I had played a Tide Turner, and then we had Star-Crossed, and then I hid a Switcheroo my turn. It makes the opponent think they know what it is, especially if you're very quick with your cards in the way that you kind of put them to the front and then you immediately slip something underneath. The opponent doesn't think twice about it. They know what that card is. If you have a big unit, or like I did, I had a Mel in my base, and they move in an average unit that's going to either kill my Mel or the opponent, or the card that's there, plus the Tide Turner, they look at that and go, oh yeah, that's nothing, and then you pull out a Switcheroo, and it's like, oh, you know, that's ruined the game for me. So Switcheroo, definitely a best as a 1, maybe a 2 with 1 in the main, but having it as a game 2 adjuster, really powerful. Next is Ravenbloom Prefect, which I did talk about, I didn't take. Having this as a 1 or a 2 is definitely powerful. I had Acceptable Losses, which is also very powerful, especially because it's an action speed card, and I had against the Draven, they decided to Spinning Blade one of their units, and the second that they did that, I went, don't even bother about equipping it, because it's gone. You have now burnt the cost of Quick Draw, sorry, not Quick Draw, the cost of Spinning Blades for 1 energy on my Acceptable Losses, and as such, I think this will go to the bench, and Acceptable Losses will find, I'll put 3 in, but will find its way onto the sideboard, if not the main, because everyone's playing gear at the moment in one way or another. Angler Beast didn't see a lot of play, but that's because the types of decks I was versing didn't need it. But on saying that, I did actually bring in 1 copy of Angler Beast, because the utility between Angler Beast and a Thousand-Tailed Watcher, while this is a 12-point turn, 12 energy turn, it was monstrous. I had a situation where I had an Angler Beast, and even the existence of being able to mesmerize and stupefy, and my legend ability, it put them in such an awkward position where I knew this was a possibility at any stage, and so against Swarm decks, sure, it's great, but even against decks that have like Akali Silent, because Akali Silent says you cannot choose me. If I actually, where is it? Akali Silent can't be chosen on its choosing combat. Ruin Runner can't be chosen full stop. But both of those units are Thousand-Tailed Watcher, Anglerfish possibilities, because Anglerfish doesn't require you to choose. It does obviously hurt yourself, but as we were kind of mentioning, Plundering Power and the Ravenbloom are great, and returning Tide Turner to hand, those are the only ones that are really affected, and so this doesn't hurt us nearly as much as it would always hurt the opponent. And the last card is Unchecked Power, and Unchecked Power was a beautiful one-of. It is one of those cards where I thankfully wasn't playing around its possibility, but seeing it really was beneficial when I did see it. Over the 2 games that I did see it, I played it once, and then I ended up winning without it the other time. I had it in my main hand once, and I did not keep it because I kept the Thousand Tail Watch instead. My opening hand to that game was rubbish. But it being here, it has a place, and it's a very good place for it to be. Now, we have 2 positions on the sideboard and 13 positions in the main deck. Very quickly, 1 acceptable losses into the main deck, and 1 into the sideboard. Stacked deck can stay here. Same thing with Downstage Dramatics, and instead we're going for the Downstage Dramatics. We're going to look at bringing in Dredge up, and we're going to make it a 2 in the main deck, because if we have to discard this, we can still flow it for a draw 1, so it's just a much better version for this style. Hard Bargain, 1 in the sideboard, none in the main. Pack of Wonders, bring another one into the main, because I think it does have a very high amount of versatility between the Fizz, the Mel-Defiant Souls, the Tide Turners, and even a Thousand Tail Watcher. All of those are very strong options for a Pack of Wonders, as well as the ability for us to leave a battlefield, preventing combat, and maintaining control of the few units we do have. It is a fantastic option. Plundering Porrow, like I said, it's really nice having one, and I think we will move it up to a 3 in place of the Tide Turner. Smokescreen we got rid of, same with Twilight Sept. Watching Spirit, as we said, it's kind of a bait. I like it, but I also don't. And we'll bring in 2 Diana Lunaris instead of the 2 Lecturing Yordles, because I always found my units dying at battlefields, so I'm getting at least 1 trigger if I have her as an attacker. That makes a 4 grouping, well actually a 6 grouping of turn 1 options if you're going second, alongside the additional 8, so our turn 2 is going to look very strong, and our turn 1 is just going to look about average. The Ravenbloom Prefect, we've gotten rid of the existing reason. Tornado Warrior, kind of the same thing. Covert Informant, having 2 was nice, having 3 won't be good. Shock Blast. I don't think Shock Blast fits this very well, but I can see how it would if we bring in more empowered units. It's worth noting, at the moment we have 4. Obviously we'll be bringing in an additional, maybe 2 Mels. I'm going to stay at 1 for now, but that will give us 5 options. But a Shock Blast is best in a deck that has a few more. It's a truly fascinating card, and a combination of Mel's Legend and this is interesting, and I think I'll bring it in because it's going to be interesting. Starcrossed, we will keep it a 2, same with Applied Researcher. And we've got 3 last. Mind Splitter, kind of fits the same category as Bewitching Spirit, in which, well, it fits the same category as Bewitching Spirit and Thousand Tail Watcher, where it's expensive as a whole play in its own to play this, and it is a very large unit that does provide immediate results, and maybe I will bring it out, but not yet. No, we'll play around, find out. It's also a lot heavier on the purple side, which would balance our rune economy a bit. Hui, I did think about Hui. Hui is a really fascinating one, in which there are some units when I finally do have Hui that I don't mind burning. Plundering Porrow is a great example. And giving the +3 would make this incredibly powerful and difficult to deal with. The ability to draw 1 if you discard a spell, yes, it does go against the whole Mel-Defiant, but being able to recycle through this is really strong as well. I don't think it's there yet, but I'm going to keep it here just in case. Sprite Burst is a medium cost card that would provide alternative temporary units. It's okay, but I don't have issue with units. I have issues with not having enough runes to do exactly what I want. So for that reason, that'll also stay there. And the Unchecked Power, 1 in the side is great. I think 1 in the main would be too expensive. It would sit there, but at the same time, I could be wrong. It's worth really considering what we're going to be looking at in the future. With 2 cards to be added, are there any that I'd like to turn into a 3 of? I think Gust, absolutely. Add 1 in. And is there anything I would like to turn into a 3 of? Hard to say. If anything, it would most likely be a star-crossed. Yeah, at most, I think it would have to be a star-crossed. And what is the new ratio? It stays the same, but let's do some real counting. So we've got 1, 2, a mix, so we're going to ignore it. 2 blue, 2 purple, so 2 and 2. 4, 4, 5, 7, so it's a 5 to 7. Then it's technically 2 here, and it's another 2 here, so it's 4 here and 2 here, so we're looking at about a 9 to 9, or an 8 to 9 split-ish, which does make sense for this ratio. Or across the board, however, what are going to be more effective low utility or low turn rune economy cards? 3 Star-Crossed and 3 Ride the Winds and 3 Fizzes. That is a 7 split to 2, 3, 4. 5 maybe. So we do like this ratio of 7 to 5. If we obviously added this more in, it would most likely be a 6-6, but we like where we're going with this. With that in mind, let us now go over to the battlefields, and I want to... I also just realised there's a whole tab for legends that I completely ignored. Let's go to the battlefields now. The battlefields that I chose to take with me are different. I kept Threshold and Starspring, but I got rid of Abandoned Hall, specifically for the Frozen Fortress, or Forbidding Waste, sorry. Forbidding Waste, whereas if a unit is defending alone, it gets -2. This worked perfectly into a Draven, where we both picked Forbidding, well, we both picked Starspring, and then we both picked Forbidding Waste. It destroyed their possibility of holding, and in some ways that's great, but also we've got to remind ourselves that the Mel wants to see the opponent have a unit there, maybe just one. So having Forbidding Waste was actually kind of negative. The alternative I've seen is Frozen Fortress, but dealing 1 damage, it just doesn't fit this archetype as much. So let's start from the bottom. We don't want to burn. Burn is terrible for this deck. Sand Switching. Each spell that chooses 1 or more units here that are friendly to it costs 1 power less. It's okay. Risen Altar, we don't have issues with empowerment costs because across the board we only have 4 units that actually have empowerment costs, and they're all 3s. So reducing them by 1 isn't going to be the difference maker, and we'd also have to have the unit there, so it's okay. Protective Sands. When you conquer here, if you control 4 it would be okay, but we're not actually burning that many. We want a slow build. Mystic Vortex is terrible for us. Piltover Forge, we don't have a lot of friendly gear that is activatable, that costs energy. We have none. Kenku Temple, none of our units have tank anymore. The only one that we did was Lecturing Yordle. Heisho, or Heisho, Shell of the World. Players ignore Deflect while paying for spells and abilities, choosing something here. This I did consider because we have no units that cost Deflect. But this would be a very strong Aurelia counter, and I'm going to add it to the main deck immediately for that reason. But we'll continue going up the list. Dragon Roost, we have no dragons. Brush and Barren Pit are tokens. Vault of Helia allows us to return, when we hold your token unit, non-token units cost 1 more. It's a bit more effective in decks like Ivan, which can ignore it, or in decks such as Azir or Victor, who can offset the cost anyway because, well, they just don't play units while they hold, they instead just play tokens. It would also work well in the Tentacles Annie video against Akali. Valley of Idols, we don't have any need for buffing. We don't conquer a lot with excess damage. We actually avoid combat. Across all 3 games, it was very rare that we moved into combat. We actually instead forced alternative pathways. The Academy, giving one of our spells repeat with the cost equal to its base would be kind of nice. Stupefy being a 2 for 2 Mesmerize being a 2 energy, 2 power, being able to choose 2 of them would be quite nice. The Flash would be useless. The Ride the Wind, we would be able to choose 2 units to ride the wind. The Starcross would give us multiple options. And the opponent would also have some possibilities, but it would benefit us quite well. However, the hold trigger does make it maybe, so I'm actually going to add that to the bench to think about later. We've already got Starspring, Ripper's Bay. When a unit here is returned to a player's hand, that player may pay 1 to channel 1 when exhausted. A great way to offset the cost, but we would both need, well, actually, Ripper's Bay might also be another alternative, and so we're going to add that to the bench as well. Don't use experience. Already talked about that one. We don't spend a lot of spells that have 4 or more. We actually have none. We've already done a Forbidding Waste. We don't have want to kill any of our beginning units at beginning phase. No temporary units. Being able to return any unit from battlefield to base when you hold here would be very powerful, and there's a very large number that do this, but we actually want the reverse of keeping enemy units at battlefield until a bit later, and giving the option for the opponent to hold this battlefield and really mess us up would be unfortunate. Because it would give them an opportunity to attack positively. Altar of Blood, being able to pay 4 power to heal, exhaust, and recall. It's very expensive for what we already know is a very expensive deck. If we were running 3 seals, it'd be great. Sorry, it's 3 power, not 4 power. Abandoned Hall, we're already running, so we don't... Oh, sorry. Abandoned Hall, I think, still has a possibility, but the +1 on units that you control here, Ravenbloom already gets quite a lot of that, and being able to do that in base safely and not have it so requiring of being in combat is much more beneficial, and so I'll keep it there. Veiled Temple, we don't have equipment. Treasure Hoard would give us an alternative to create gold, but it's very rare that we have a rune count that is deliberately up on the opponent's turn. Paper Tree would be a way to create tempo for both players, that benefit us quite nicely. Sunken Temple, we have no units that really have great might, except for the 3 mega units. Seat of Power, we're not going to be multi-holding often. Rockfall Path, we don't want that. I mean, you could continue going up this list. I mean, Forgotten Monument would be another alternative, but I think with the tempo and speed that we have for this deck, we don't want Forgotten Monument. Void Gate, we don't care because we're not dealing damage, we're reducing might. War Camp would be a joke. We don't ever have that many units. Candlelit Sanctum would give us the option to predict, but will also give the opponent the option to predict, in which we have a lot more cards we don't mind seeing at all, and we are not requiring cards to create our X Factor, as you may call it. Targon's Peak, I played it against the Draven, and it was very nice, but once again, too, it wasn't that necessary, but it is worth noting to mention. Star-tipped Peak. We're not really, like, this deck is turning less and less into a hold and more of a move in, move out. So hold triggers aren't as powerful, which is why the 3 we have do not require hold triggers. And that reason, I think, is why we should actually just get rid of the Piltover Forge now. As we go up the list, I think that everything else speaks for itself. And as such, I'm happy with the way that it currently is. And I'm going to save that. We will keep it the same. We will... Yep, we'll update it. And there we go. I hope that has been somewhat informative and an update to the current position of Banish Mel. I will not be playing in the upcoming Auckland 10k event, just because I don't... as much fun as it would be, I don't think it is exactly what I'm after at this stage in the game. I'm more in the just want people to learn and have fun, and that's why we're making these types of things. But with that in mind, I hope this video has been informative. I hope it's given you some ideas as to building your own in the future. But as for me, I will catch you guys in the next one.